Once upon a time, in the magical world of theatre, dancers and performance artists graced the stage, screen and studios. Shows were running smoothly and all appeared well, but not everything was as it seemed. So, we were told by the Scottish Government to stay at home, protect the NHS, save lives. With everyone in lockdown, impacts on society and the economy were crippling and long-lasting. But what did this mean for us, the performance artists? Well, the shock was so big that the existing models of funding, governance, collaboration and delivery needed changing to meet new challenges and exploit new opportunities. As far as the UK government were concerned, we were told to retrain in other roles, such as a bus conductor. Fatima was even told that she should rethink her career, reskill and reboot in cyber. As you can imagine, this went down like a lead balloon. But we were better off in Scotland because Richard Lockhead, our MSP Minister for Further Education, Higher Education and Science at the time, was supportive by inviting the Scottish Funding Council to review our adaptability, resilience and ingenuity in meeting the challenges, stating that through our collective efforts, we are establishing a good understanding of how our tertiary sector will be impacted over the short, medium and long term, and of how the sector can contribute to the regrowth and renewal of Scotland's prosperity. And positively concluding by saying, I am confident that further and higher education and research in Scotland can emerge from this crisis even stronger. So, as one show was put on hold, another was about to begin, and the research in these changing times commenced. At the University of Edinburgh, a team of experts conducted a 2-part study to find out about the experience, response, and lessons learned from COVID-19. They investigated whether views were shared across industry stakeholders in order to capture the voice of the performance arts sector. This is your Act 1 beginner's call. I repeat, this is your Act 1 beginner's call. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Act 1. In this act, the leading roles in the cast are us, the performance artists, and our parents or significant others. Here, we complete an online survey to try and compare our thoughts and feelings before and during the COVID lockdowns. We also respond to a range of questions about our personal characteristics, such as being self-disciplined and asking others for help, and rate how useful we think they were to us during COVID. Then we send a similar survey to someone close to us, such as a parent or partner, so that they can give their thoughts on how we fared. Scene 1 shows a significant reduction in our training hours. Our bodies really knew it was significant, and now we have the stats to prove it. By definition, significant means that this was unlikely to be due to chance, nor did it happen randomly. But instead, we can say, hand on heart, that there is at least a 95% probability that it would happen again. In Scene 2, you can see the changes to our mental well-being ratings before and during COVID in red, and how our significant others rated our mental well-being before and during COVID in yellow. Overall, our mental well-being ratings got worse. There was also nearly a significant difference between how we scored ourselves and our significant others scored us, with our significant others slightly underestimating the impact we felt. The scene now takes a deeper look across the COVID period by comparing our mental well-being during the first lockdown in the spring with the second lockdown in the winter of 2020. We and our significant others agreed that we found the second lockdown somewhat more difficult than the first. Scene 3 reveals what we and our significant others scored regarding the use of mental skills to help us respond during COVID. In general, all cast members rated the usefulness of mental skills during COVID as somewhat useful, with no difference between us, the performance artists, and our significant others. The research team then asked us for more detail about specific mental skills and behaviours during COVID. These particular questions were based upon the research team's previous work focusing on psychological characteristics for developing excellence, or PCDEs, which have been used in sport and other performance environments, but not in our context in Scotland. Before I get into the details, I can tell you that all cast members rated these as being very useful. Interestingly, both groups rated these PCDEs differently, and this approached significance. In short, they perceived these to be of higher value. Here you can see the average score per question given by the two casts. And here are the average total scores for all the questions. Again, the difference between the two casts approached significance. But because the devil's in the detail, let's take a closer look. So, psychological characteristics were rated as being useful or very useful. However, our significant others thought that some were more useful for us than we did. Staying confident was where the most significant difference was. Having self-discipline and controlling our moods were also where our scores were notably different, but the statistical tests said that these only approached significance. This brings Act 1 to a close. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats for Act 2. The cast for this act are 15 lecturers from 8 Scottish Government-funded educational organisations and practitioners and directors from our 2 national dance companies. The researchers speak to each member of the cast and ask them about the impact of COVID on us and their professional practice. The findings are rich and informative for the sector, and the following scenes provide an overview of the main themes identified. Scene 1. This is about changes made by the cast during COVID and their explanations for it. First of all, cast members explained how COVID had affected the running of their organisation. Everyone said that they were poorly prepared and underestimated COVID's eventual impact. Most felt unsupported by the government and that guidance was not specific enough to meet the demands of our industry. Sam points out, I don't feel like the guidance has been particularly clear. I think it is vague and open to interpretation, and I don't know if that is a decision that they have intentionally made so the onus is left on us to interpret it as we wish. But I feel like the school's guidance that has been given out has been much clearer. We kind of have been left a little bit high and dry, so I think that the performing arts industry has been very supportive of each other. They also explain how they took on new roles or improvised their existing role to support our well-being. This typically meant more interaction with us so that they could share, update, and inform things like the curriculum and training requirements. As Tony tells the research team, I definitely think the communication has been better in COVID than it had before. I think there's been an assumption that because they are on campus, we don't need to communicate as much with them. But when they're off campus, providing regular communication to them has been a huge benefit. But more than 2/3 say that they had to provide us with greater emotional support, just as Joe says. All students have been given access to a mental health app, and the wellbeing team have set up a series of drop-ins and one-to-ones that the students can book in. Scene 1 ends with the cast making changes to comply with the government guidelines, for instance, health and safety regulations. This meant conducting many more and varied assessments and changing the way they operated. There were also financial and infrastructure challenges, for example, technological and visa arrangements to be sorted out. Resources were also redirected to send equipment to our homes that we would usually use in the studio, and some were specifically bought to meet our new learning and training needs. As Jamie says, for any kind of weights or equipment, they got them bars that they could use at home, so they supplied them with anything they needed to keep themselves ticking over fitness-wise. Scene 2 is about how cast members considered our experience during COVID and their explanations for it. It begins with everyone expressing concern about our mental health, and half the cast members described physical health concerns. The specific mental health concerns included aggravation of pre-existing problems, apathy, increased anxiety, symptoms of depression, and they identified challenges that many of us had to overcome relating to perceived self-image, loss of social contact, and loss of identity. Jamie says it all. Because they've not been able to travel, they've not been able to jump. So a dancer that hasn't jumped for a year is not going to feel ready for the profession. But it's also that self-image as well, of going, I am fatter, I am not as fit, my stamina is not quite there. And then not having the motivation of knowing exactly what to do about it. Should I go jogging? Should I do this? So I think that it's been quite difficult for them. And their diet has changed as well. Some of them are like, I am just eating rubbish because I am at home. I watch Netflix and then I go to an online class, and it's just two worlds are blurred in a way that I can't kind of cope with. Yesterday, I was talking to a learner who was, I have lost my sense of identity as a dancer. I don't know what kind of dancer I am anymore. I think it's definitely holistic. It is affecting them in lots of different ways. Interestingly, we responded to the challenges faced with a range of performances. Just as Lee puts it, I think I could split the students into 3 categories. So, the first one, which fortunately is the majority of our students, is the one where they already have the appropriate mindset to cope with any sort of difficulty that comes their way. So, the resilient ones, if I may call them that, who during this whole experience have become even more resilient, and also they've become even more self-confident. So increase their resilience, increase their self-confidence, because they see that they can actually cope with things that they were not sure they could cope with. Then the second category would be the students are kind of in the middle, so when they are in the studio, they're quite good in terms of their mindset. But when you take them away from what is comfortable, they start to labour a bit. And these are the ones who need a bit more support and a bit of encouragement. Then the third category would be the ones that are beyond help. So the ones that had issues in the studio before everything started. Self-esteem issues, anxiety issues, mental health issues, and then taking them from that environment, it was kind of a downward spiral. And even though we tried to support them and encourage them and tell them that they were able to cope with this, they're just not able to process the situation. Charlie and Joe explain that the lockdowns had actually benefited some of us because we had the time to practice our techniques in a more focused and specific way. For Joe, one of us did really well during COVID. He was in his 3rd year, but going back to basics. And I think for some of them, actually going back to basics again, that you would learn when you were a lot younger, was actually useful. I think it took the pressure off having to keep pushing for learning for new steps, or, doing really difficult things and having someone else in the room looking at you. I think it was beneficial for some of those students just to take a moment to work on really specific things for them and for their bodies. Charlie could also think of a student who, especially technically, was struggling before the lockdown happened, and she took lockdown as an opportunity to really work on her technique. She took the opportunity, grasped it with 2 hands, and we thought, this is fantastic. Frances describes how some of us had also learnt from our experiences of the first lockdown to better cope with the second lockdown. Most of them have had strategies to be able to cope with that because they've kind of been through it, so at least they know, actually, I have to get out of the house every day, or I have to set myself a to-do list. And they talk about, I know I have to do X, Y, Z. So I do think, whilst they have emotionally felt the toll more, they've been able to keep up with their studies much better. I just think that they're better equipped. I do feel like there has not been the same panic as the first lockdown, and yeah, I think that there has been more of an attitude of steeliness and let's get through this. They have definitely adapted. Really, it is quite impressive how well and how quickly they've been able to go, right, this is a new situation. How are we going to deal with it? But some of us really struggled, which resulted in derailment or dropping out. Tony explains how we have had students that have said, actually, I have come back, I have tried. Working in this way is not for me. I am going to withdraw and I'll reapply at a time when I know I can be back in the studio. There are some that have really struggled with that, or they have taken a back seat and they've seen where others have taken the lead and they've allowed them to take the lead. And in that respect, they have just sat back a little bit more. Lee also explains that you can see the apathy and the lethargy in their movement. You can see when people are not really trying, and that is not them. I mean, I look at them and I think, that is just now who they are. It is almost like another virus on top of the virus that they have been infected by. You know, I don't recognise some of them. Some of them have gone so far down the slippery slope that I don't actually know if they'll get back. They have allowed themselves to get so engulfed. I say allowed themselves. I'm not saying that they're doing it deliberately, but they are really engulfed with a kind of bleakness about their whole future that they cannot shake themselves out of. Scene 2 ends with all cast members emphasising the importance of psychological and social characteristics, as well as the environment in determining how well we did. Most said that commitment and engagement, having and using social support, having realistic expectations and resilience were key. For instance, with regards to coping, Chris thought those of us that fared better could vocalise how they were feeling, whether it was with faculty, whether it was with their peers, family members, friends, whatever. The students that didn't have the emotional maturity or the conversational skills or the support previous to come to college to communicate feelings and thoughts. And I will kind of say it was more male heavy here. They are not very good at speaking out. I could see them kind of withdrawing more into themselves. So it had a knock-on effect on their training, but my main concern at that point was their mental health and their support that they had. Vivian thinks they did a lot of working out in their own time. They were motivated to do it because although they would normally be with us in 4 days a week, well, they were only getting in the equivalent of 2 because we had to split the classes. So in the days they weren't in college, they were doing a lot. They were motivated to do stuff on their own, to do that body conditioning programme, to do whatever needed to be done to try and stay on top of it. And Sam says they had lots of one-to-ones with everyone at this stage, particularly the younger members of the company who hadn't, for example, had an injury and hadn't have to come back from an injury. So they hadn't had that experience. So it is very similar coming back to your body after a pandemic. You have got to completely change your expectations. You've got to give yourself a timeline and you've got to not put too much pressure on yourself. So there has to be structure, and you have to actually have patience that your body has been to a certain place. It can absolutely go there again, but you need to give it time, and you need to give it the right tools to get there. But not all explanations for us struggling were psychological. Sometimes our environment played a part too. In this part of the scene, Andy has lots of complaints about students. One student flat in particular has been threatened with legal action because they were tap dancing in their living room and singing, and they've had complaints from their neighbours. I think all of that the logistics of working from home, it just doesn't work. Students didn't have the space in their house to be doing grand jetés across the floor and triple pirouettes around their living room. It just didn't work. Act 2, Scene 3. This scene is about the lessons learnt by cast members who reflect on the COVID experience 1 year after the first national lockdown. The scene begins with Adrian and Nick reflecting on artists' health and well-being, and Nat on the value of developmental opportunities. Adrian says, "I suppose I have become really pretty aware and concerned on how can we support that and the value of well-being. So scheduling, supporting the well-being of people, the mental well-being is really, really crucial and a really important investment at this point. It is not necessarily related to training, just half an hour of taking care of their bodies. So somebody might lead a self-massage session or might lead a meditation or something that is just designed to take care of yourself and stay as healthy as possible." And Nick, the other thing I really miss is England have their Dance UK forum, which is so brilliant, and Healthier Dancer. And we missed having something quite focused here where we could really point them in the right direction for support that was more dance specific. Whereas Nat focuses on the opportunities seized. I would say they have improved other skills, technical skills for sure. Some of the dance videos that they've submitted, from a technical standpoint, I don't mean from a dance technique. I am talking about the editing and cutting music and all those kind of things. The non-dancey element of it. Amazing. They have garnered a lot of skills. They have honed a lot of skills that won't be useless, for the future. And they have kind of taught themselves how to do that, which is great, because I don't know how to do that. So they have been quite, self-motivating where that's concerned. There is also a realisation and awareness of change in organisational culture within this scene. Chris and Tony talk about a transformation in relationships between cast members and artists. I think there was a kind of humanising of it, to be honest. So the students, for the first time, we have got quite a formal relationship with the students in the department. I think that that's just the way that ballet is, to be honest. We don't really talk about our home life with the students. We just go in and we teach them. And we have got nice, warm relationships with them. But it's not about what we do at home. For them to actually see, I am at home trying to teach a ballet class and my 3-year-old is crying and therefore she might come in, and there is not a huge amount. So I think for them to see that and that we were absolutely trying our best has really helped. I think it's helped our relationship with them. I think we appreciated the students' home life, and then they appreciated the fact that we had a home life as well. So I think there was a real, we're also grateful that we could carry on in some way and there could be some connection. And I think everyone learned how to work online very quickly because we sort of had to. It is amazing what you have to do when you've got no choice, I guess. This scene ends with a discussion about practicalities and support during COVID. For example, in relation to adaptability, Francis says, "I think that the preparation side of things has probably tightened up because we're online and because everything has to be done at home. Our kind of electronic resources are definitely tightened up. I think probably also logistically, for example, if you have snow days where historically we would be like, right, college is cancelled. I think now we would be in a much better position to say we are online today and staff can just start delivering online. There are also lessons learnt regarding supporting students' welfare, as Charlie reflects. From the students, it was really hard to gauge how they were feeling, and the only thing I remember, because we didn't really ask. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Are you worried about this? Maybe we should have done that more. The last scene is scene 4, where the strategies for recovery are expressed by the cast. These are quite broad in nature, with more than half the cast commenting on the need to address artists' health and well-being. As Leslie explains, we're also looking at, I would say, a supportive outcome with students' mental health as well, and that has increased significantly over the last year, particularly in something like the performing arts, where our students, I would say, chose arts courses, very much so, because of the social aspect of it as well. Ali also says, I don't think we can even advise, but it would be great if we could go on the Dance UK website, and it's like, but they all live in London. Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? I think it is having that kind of shared referral. Perhaps it's something like that. And Robin discusses, we talk about the word resilience because it has been around in our life for a few years, hasn't it? But how do we develop resilience in our young artists quickly and early so that they're able to cope with these kind of events, So we have those hours that we can play with and we can use them for whatever we deem is necessary. We add Pilates, we add well-being, we have got somatic practice, we have got yoga. They are not part of the SQA framework. And one of the things we want to look at is more well-being sessions early on, like building that resilience. Cast members also acknowledge the need for changes to be made at an organisational level, especially in terms of the scope and sustainability when supporting performance artists. Bobby draws on practices from other industries by looking to sports coaching. There is actually a lot of similarities in terms of what they do. So yeah, I find that we are actually working more and more with sports people in terms of strength and conditioning, psychological sport, than we are with ballet schools because, we're just moving, it feels, in that direction. It is maybe because there is more research and that is the bottom line. And Andy says, other countries tend to invest more generally just in sustaining practice and in developing artistic practice. For Scotland, again, because we're in the periphery in terms of the UK and in terms of Europe, it is really hard to retain dancers of a certain, for lack of a better word, level or trajectory because there are less opportunities. So the more sustainable and supportive the industry is, the more it becomes and the more involved it becomes. Changes to infrastructure and industry governance is the final word from the cast before the finale, with governmental and professional support featuring as key to success. Lee and Vivian highlight the role of government advice and support. I don't think there's a definitive answer. What could be done apart from clearer guidelines? I think there is no clear, once we know the guidelines, we can make provisions to make it safe and everything else, but I think without the guidelines, we're snookered. The government should think about what they need to do for this industry and how they can support the Performing Arts College or university students, because at the moment, the general consensus is that they feel a bit kind of brushed under the carpet, if that makes sense. On the other hand, Jamie takes a more internal view across the higher education sector. It has brought the colleges together because we have all been, as I keep saying to people, we are in the same storm, we're just in different boats. But now we are tying to each other a little bit more. And also, there's always been issues with if students maybe transfer from one college to the other to do the same course. We always have had difficulty with, I would say, the level of quality at maybe one college or another, or what our delivery model is. So we have much more joined up thinking and joined up approach in that way. And this brings Act 2 to a close. So, to conclude, this performance reveals a number of important messages to enable the show to carry on. First of all, is the perceived importance and value placed on psychological and social characteristics by the entire cast. Yet, in Act 2, it is interesting that these were not reported as being formally taught, neither before nor during COVID. In support of this, overall performers that flourished were perceived to demonstrate some of the psychological characteristics for developing excellence in Act 1, such as motivation, having realistic expectations, and self-discipline. There is some evidence, though, to suggest that the significant others in Act 1 may have underestimated the impact of COVID on artists' mental well-being. It should not be forgotten, however, that the performance arts organisations funded by the Scottish Government were severely challenged during COVID. A lot of this resulted from the demands on performers' mental health whilst trying to meet curricula outcomes and performance standards. As a result, all organisations felt the need for more local support in Scotland. This brings the present show to an end, but for it to carry on, investment should be made to proactively teach and develop the psychological and social skills needed to take on and learn from future challenges. These skills are important for continuing as performers and to ensure the successful transition when the curtains inevitably close on others. COVID has shown us that the responsibility for this needs to be reconsidered at a sector level. The good news is that the shows do go on.